Gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome all of you in the third and last panel of the third day of the Abu Dhabi Strategic Debate, the 7th. As the first and second panels today focused on health and economic fallout from the global coronavirus pandemic, the third panel is dedicated to discuss the geopolitical impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Discussion will try to give answers to some question in this regard. What is the impact of coronavirus crisis on relations between superpowers? Will the crisis enhance the rise of China? Will this grave global health? Will it drive countries to adopt a more nationalist and nationalist approach? Will this pandemic push world countries to pay much more attention to unconventional threats of pandemics and those related to climate change and environment? Prominent world strategists and experts will participate in this panel, which include Mr. Andrés Ortega, Senior Research Fellow, Global Governance and Technological Transformation, Elcano Royal Institute, Dr. Mathew Burrows, Director of Foresight Strategy and Risk Initiative in the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at Atlantic Council. And of course, Dr. Zaid Eyadat, Director of the Center of Strategic Studies at University of Jordan. I would like to welcome all of the speakers and thank them for accepting our invitation to take part in this panel specifically. I would also like to welcome those who are attending the panel on the Center's account and all various social media platforms, as well on the YouTube channel and via Zoom application. Before I give the floor to the speakers, I would like to draw the attention of our Arab viewers that they can listen to the Arabic interpretation of the discussion by clicking on the French channel down to the screen. I would like to welcome all of my speakers. I will start with the question for all the speakers. And I will start with Dr. Ortega. As COVID-19 formed a strategic shock in the world, how it will affect redefining the concept of power at the level of countries and companies that are influential in international relations? Consequently, how will this affect the redistribution of power in the world?
Thank you, Dr. Al-Kebbi, and thank you to the Emirates Policy Center for inviting me. I think COVID has been an accelerator of trends that were already there. No? Among these, one which is not a trend which was there is that I think there is less power in the world. I think that everybody has lost, and we are in a negative sum situation in terms of power. Some more than others, no? Mm-hmm. Of the ones who have lost less is, as in China, which is using its situation to rise more again with economic recovery, a better economic recovery, its contribution to global growth, as in 2008, 2009, which has adopted a more self-sufficient approach in its new 5-year plan, which was approved some days ago, with an emphasis on internal circulation. Even if I think that the image of China in general has suffered, but the issue of the vaccines could change its image in the developing world. I also think there has been a loss of influence of the West, and particularly the US, because the current US government has withdrawn from the world order And we are in a crisis where, for the first time, the US is not at the forefront. No? Maybe President Biden, if he's confirmed, may change that. But the world has changed in the meantime. No? I think also there is less multilateralism, that we have a real crisis of multilateralism, that everybody went on its own at the beginning, that the G7 and the G20 are absent, that the United Nations Security Council is paralyzed, and many technical organizations have become spaces where countries compete for influence rather than cooperate. What's the result? The result, I think, is a more multipolar than multilateral world, and in which we see growing inequalities and divergence. No? In this, I think that the state, as you were asking, has gained increasing importance, because we need public finances for many things, and that the role of the state in economy, in health, in security is revitalized. There is more sovereign approaches, but also we see the rise of importance of other actors, non-state actors, especially major company, especially big tech, that happen to be mainly American or Chinese. And multinational companies have nationalities and geopolitics. And we see them in a kind of vertical integration, which is also leading towards deglobalization. But we also see coincidences, all these antitrust movements by governments against big tech in Europe, in the US, and even in China, as we've seen with the pressures on big tech companies by the Chinese government, including the or Alibaba, no? Or the US government intervening in against Google and other things. No? Having said that, I think we are in an age where public-private cooperation is obliged, and we have to go for that. No, we are in a multi-stakeholder governance in which states are not enough, and we need to incorporate firms, civil society, scientists, as we see these days. I also would say that technology is not only economy, or not even geopolitics. No? The way it is used has to do with liberties and democracy, and it has to do with political government system. It is something we cannot underestimate.
Dr. Mathew?
Well, I would agree with Dr. Ortega that in many ways the pandemic has proved to be an accelerator. So that is that we had some pre-existing trend lines, and now we're, instead of disrupting that, I mean, it's actually accelerating what we saw before the crisis. And obviously part of that is the center of gravity economic gravity moving towards East Asia, and that's really being confirmed. These are the countries that are, coming out of this first, and actually with China, you're going to see some growth, whereas in Western US, Western European countries, you actually are seeing a huge deficit and recession at the end of the year. So that's I think, as he mentioned, I mean, this shows actually, again, how China has been resilient, despite being the one that where the pandemic started. I just want to point out, I mean, besides these two, where the changes are at the very top level, I mean, the rise of China, the West, US and Europe being particularly wounded by this pandemic. I think what we could see is that, this pandemic really puts a stake through the heart of globalization. if you're looking at, economic growth, one of the big global results of these several decades of growth was a rise of a global middle class. And what looks like is that some of that global middle class is actually going to sink back to poverty. You have whole regions like Latin America that are taking huge hits and could be in a really a depression for a decade or more. So I think that, yes, there's a movement up there, but I think for a lot of people in the world that their hopes and their aspirations have been really undermined there, and that, in countries, we used to talk about the BRICS at one time, and when you look at what is going on in Russia, India, Brazil, South Africa, so everybody except China, pandemic has been very bad news. And you're actually, I think, going to see some of those countries take a hit where you're going to really see they will have a difficulty digging out of it. And for populations who are used to growth year after year and their own ability to move up being taken away from them, I think that this is going to be a huge tragedy. The question is, what will Biden make a difference? And, obviously, President-elect Biden believes very much in a multilateral world. He wants to get the U.S. back into the global institutions that President Trump took the U.S. out of, such as the Paris Climate Change Agreement, such as the WHO, wants to reform the WTO. And I think you're going to see, some real efforts by him to reassert U.S. leadership and try to get the institutions going. But one of the big problems is that, both Biden and Trump are more or less the same when it comes to China and their supporters. What's happened is that Trump made a big issue that China was taking advantage of the U.S. That message is pretty much agreed across the board on both sides of the partisan divide in the U.S. So if you really want to have a multilateralist world, U.S. is going to have to find some way of cooperating with China. Mm-hmm. And it is not clear how Biden shifts from the campaign was very much used the anti-China rhetoric. He actually accused Trump of being weak on China, how you move towards talking about cooperating with China. And China, for its part, is less interested in being patronized by the U.S. So that, the U.S. will really have to show that it respects China. And if anything, this pandemic is inflamed the rhetoric and the feelings against China, the public feelings against China. So how Biden can talk about cooperating and incorporating China in this multilateralist world, I think is going to be a challenge. And really, I don't quite see how he manages to accomplish it. So, will we actually begin to see a bipolar world out of this? I think that is the real big questions, or a real split, the global, which will, in its way, to undermine globalization.
Thank you, Dr. Zaid.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ibtisam. I'm delighted being part of this, and allow me first to actually congratulate you for this fantastic ADSD. You have made it where everyone else stopped not doing things. I really I respect this highly. And also, you have succeeded in putting together like an outstanding breakthrough agenda, identifying drivers of change, and you've done a milestone actually in the achievement. So congratulations again. Well, look, I'm not sure if I really can agree in calling the pandemic as a strategic shock. I would go for a shock without a strategic, which means is not actually impacting in a meaningful way the balance of power and the distribution of power worldwide. Maybe it's the contrary, as I will explain in a minute. So, in my mind, what had happened actually is only a challenging for the governing system rather to the world order structure. In other words, the international institutions, the multilateralism, and the norms that we got used to, which is the liberal system of the world, was challenged by such pandemic, including every single state, including China. Now, bringing an end to this pandemic at any expense, I'm not sure if this is going to do any good for any country whatsoever. Now, it's obvious the impacts, the consequences, the aftermath of this pandemic, and especially its burden, are globally and domestically are unevenly distributed, whereby we see big, rich countries can deal with this in much better way than small, poor countries. Same within the same society. So if you look, for example, at the weak members, the disadvantages within any society, the marginalized, they actually been bearing the most of the cost of this pandemic for reasons beyond this discussion. But my point, this pandemic is not a game changer. There is no shifting in the power structure or power distribution. There is no accelerating of China rising in what way that, a lot of my colleagues, political scientists and experts and pundits, tend to think that way. And, I argue against this actually because what I see in the contrary of what everyone or most of the people thinking, if this pandemic has shown us something, has shown us how the supply chain as part of the political economy, international political economy, is a major component of states' power. And while all major powers in the world were relying much on China and others in terms of supply chain and production, they've realized then they have to do something else. Now, if we think of technology, as my colleagues will be talking about, and how technology will substitute for that supply chain and the disruption that might be caused by the pandemic, then I think China is losing and is losing a great deal.
How?
Well, simply because, China has see two things happening in my mind, Dr. Sam, and to your viewers. This crisis, in terms of economic impact, has not come at the basis of the production as we had witnesses and experienced back in 2008 and in the previous economic shocks and disasters and depressions. This is caused by simply a frozen trade voluntarily, quote unquote, because of the pandemic, because of the social distancing, because of a ban on travels, giving the spread of the virus itself. But everything else, will go back to its normal. Now, we know that some companies have lost some customers, some small companies have lost great deals, as I've been saying. So, it is a relative distribution of burden and loss within a society and in the global level. But because of that, China lost a lot and will be losing a lot. Now, think of the trade the supply chain, who will be going again to invest in China? When you rely on trade and when you rely on foreign investments in your country, and when such a pandemic, such a shock of uncertainty comes in and then undermine both, then I think there are going to be a lot of suffering in that part of the world, and we will see how it unfolds itself. Of course, it depends fully on how the United States within the new administration will be reacting to that. There are predictions and analysis saying actually for the coming 40, 50 years, United States will only grow stronger and stronger. So the way I see the world and the global strategic landscape is business as usual. United States is getting more benefits of that. United States will grow stronger. Power will be concentrated more and more in the United States. If we add to that the two important trends of aging populations globally and the advantage of automation and technology, artificial intelligence and machine learning, then I think there is a serious game changers to the distribution of power in the hands of the United States.
Well, one of our speaker, Dr. Kishore Mahbubani, he wrote about China, how China won. This is another, maybe we should bring you in another panel for a real debate. Okay, Dr. Ortega, how will COVID-19 affect the redefining other concepts like conflict as well as cooperation, competition between states and big companies?
First, I think that digitalization or digitization and connectivity, digital connectivity, have proved themselves to be essential for maintaining a part of our economic life and a part of our private life. And most of these are brought by private companies. And we also see cooperation between pharmaceuticals and governments, or organizations of governments like the European Union. No? But I also see that there are, as I was saying before, anti-monopolistic wins, not only from Europe, but also from the US, and as I said, from China. How far will they go? It's difficult to tell so far. In big tech, I think they are resisting regulation. The present situation in the US, we will see who controls the Senate finally, favors the company. But think also that in California, where the Silicon Valley is, there is a reinforcement of the law on privacy through the adoption of Proposition 24. No? And in Europe, I think the idea of regulatory superpower may be weakened by considerations, especially from Germany, that too much regulation undermines competitivity, European competitivity, and that you cannot be a regulatory superpower if you are not a technological superpower. Yes, there is a great game of technology going on in the world and in connectivity wars. But I think the US is still the world major digital superpower. 15 of the world top 50 digital technology companies, excluding fintechs and e-commerce, are American. While in Europe, we only have 8. And in China, they have 8 also. No? The US was the first state to develop national strategies and military doctrine around the use of cyber power. Mm-hmm. And I think it has developed the world's largest commercial sector devoted to cybersecurity, as we have seen from leaks over the past decades, including how they exploit US commercial dominance in digital technology. You know? And we see that in the way the US is imposing itself generally, is imposing its criteria in 5G about banning Huawei. No? Mm-hmm. China aims to surpass that. They're going from made in China 2025, which was a public strategy, and I think they will never again publish a public strategy, to now talking about 2035, not public, in which they want to really dominate and be self-reliant and self-sufficient in terms of technology.
Okay. Dr. Mathew, will COVID-19 lead to new international understanding that can enhance the sharing of international responsibility, distribution of development, and justice?
I think at this point, it's an open question whether you can move towards basically, bolstering the World Health Organization, the WHO, so that it actually can do its job and warn about new pandemics, and that you can have that, cooperation that China is open to others inspecting its, its labs to determine if there is a threat on pandemics, and you could see this also expanding into other areas like climate change, arms control, and other areas. But as we've talked about, states are very protective of their sovereignty, and I don't think China is going to open itself up in this environment. I mean, because they fear that they're going to be attacked by the US. I mean, that their own weaknesses are going to be exploited and against it. So how you can develop an atmosphere where all countries come together and see that for the greater good, including their own interests, that they should be cooperating. I tend to think that this is still going to be a very difficult road ahead, and that as I talked about earlier, the potential is for more divisions in the world than there are actually going to be broad global cooperation. Now, one of the efforts, particularly of Biden, will be to enhance that cooperation with Europeans, where we haven't seen that as much under Trump. You could see it with other allies and partners, including on, we talked before about supply chains and ensuring that against these kind of threats that there's stockpiles of medical equipment. I mean, that you could see these sort of arrangements below the global level, but between countries, between different regions, and including China with its Belt and Road partners, beginning at that level to build resilience and to cooperate. But it will take quite an effort to get back to a place where there's really global cooperation.
Though that Belt and Road based on cooperation, I mean, the Chinese Belt and Road based on cooperation and globalization, of course. Dr. Zaid, who wins and who loses during and after COVID-19 crisis? How will this affect redefining the rules of the international system?
Well, thank you, Doctor, again for this excellent question. And it is really too hard to identify winners and losers if we limited our thinking to the immediate consequences, impact of this pandemic on, let's say, some some transactions. And I call it transactions in all its levels. So for example, those who will be producing the vaccine will win. But most important, the most trusted vaccine producers will win. So if there is, as we know, there've been like 2-3 Russians vaccine, and there've been some Chinese vaccinations. But when United States companies announce their, or Pfizer's and other American companies, the world start to see hope.
So to interrupt here, but there is an article in Foreign Affairs saying that China is winning of its vaccine. It's a soft power because it can distribute it to the poor countries. Well, the others, because of its prices is high, they cannot use this. So, what do you think?
Well, look, Doctor. Now let's be very rational, realistic, hardcore. International politics is competition over status and prestige. It's competition over power. And, giving vaccine to poor is not going to win you anything, even if you do. And I'm not sure China will do anyway. I'm not sure actually if someone have already booked some vaccine trade with, which I'm not sure. I don't know. But I know for a fact there are so many other countries already have signed contracts to buy vaccine from Pfizer. So that what I'm trying to say about winners and losers, where the public, where the people, where the international places their trust in, and it is in the United States company, and it's in the United States technology innovations. But let me now go back. Now, we've been talking about accelerating pre-existing trends before the pandemic, which actually the normal was that the world is at the edge of the return of the great power competition. And the great power competition takes us back, and that's why I appreciate this session and the entire program that you put together in this ADSD 7th. It's about understanding the landscape of the global geostrategic map. And by the way, it is, the international discourse about this comes down to two trends, with some minor non-dominant discourses. The first one is this return of a great power is taking states back to their internal affairs. That is populism, that's nationalism, that's identity politics. That's been there. Recent surveys about United States and from United States, thinkers, thought leaders, and average citizens, their views of China are somewhat not friendly. And they will support any American policies toward China if that will, ensure more American security and more jobs coming into the Americans. So when we're talking about, 70 million, some voted for Trump. This is not about only division in voting. It's division about worldview. Now, this is what I want to say. The geostrategic issues is a war in the minds, is war in the heads. It depends on how we perceive the world, how we see it. It's about our worldviews. How does the world work? So for those who believe in the return of great powers, and I am one of them, I think it's obvious that China represents what Germany had represented to Britain back in 19th century, early 20th century, before 1914 war, where Britain was the dominant navy and superpower, and Germany just challenged them. And because of that, we have these populists that led to Hitler later on. And think about that, this ideological divide again, one more time. So the word is this: the power is concentrated into the NATO-led US leadership. There are some revisionist states. It's Russia, it's China, and it is some regional revisionist, Iran, North Korea, and others. But the dominance is in the West and led by United States, particularly because Europe is getting its own problem. Now, China been making a great success in coming into the world stage. And China never wanted to be rich, as we all know. They wanted is to be wealthy, to be powerful, to transfer that wealth into military might, and to project its own power, to liberate itself and its history and its culture from a century of humiliation they've been subject to by European powers. So if you take in all that together, we see there are two options dealing with rising China from this perspective: realism, rationality. Either containing China now with all means possible and limiting China to its regional and very small regional dominance, but not to be equal for the United States. And that in its own is not a recipe for stability in the region, for Japan and for Australia and also for India and the rest of Asia.
For us, for Middle East.
And for the Middle East, of course, it's not a recipe for. But that is one of the worldview. The other worldview is, it's about the liberal order that had dominated, or the delusion of that liberal order, to borrow Mearsheimer's phrase, the great illusion about this liberal system. And I tend to think, all realists are one way or another are pessimistic, and I'm one of them. I'm trying to overcome that by borrowing Gramsci again, by using the optimism of will over the pessimism of mind. But I think when it comes to international politics, these are the rules of the games, and without understanding how the world works, and we cannot ever understand who are the winners and who are the losers. So to my mind, it's obvious now. So I see still the United States is winning.
Okay, let's see. Dr. Ortega, how will the redistribution of power in the international system after the COVID-19 reflect on the redistribution of power in the Middle East region? And this is also goes to you, Zaid.
Okay.
Dr. Ortega?
No, the first thing, as I was saying before, I think that COVID is making us poorer, everybody, and so we have less power. And I think that as a first statement, the general power in the region is going down. I think first, Iran, for example, is losing power with the crisis, is being deeply affected by a third wave of COVID, but it has a new strategic agreement with China, which we don't know much. And I think that the return of the US with President Biden to the nuclear agreement, if Iran fulfills the condition, will help them. I see that the COVID-19 has provoked severe economic problems for the Gulf region countries. Recession from COVID, based on the fall of oil prices, but also fiscal problems from sectors like everybody, but even more so, like airlines, tourism, construction, a change of socioeconomic models. And also, I think that COVID is bringing in the green factor. We will see the return. We will see it with the return of a democratic administration in the US, plus Europe, that might lead to a greener world. Because I think the idea that meddling with nature is dangerous has grown everywhere. And I think the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of this idea. The green agenda is in part domestic and not only international politics. Also, I think that for some people in the region, some countries, especially not in the Gulf, but in the MENA region and in North Africa, we see that the loss of remittance from foreign workers is important and is having an effect. We might see more failed states, and the thing that I think more positive of what has been happening under the COVID time is diplomatic agreements with Israel, which I think is helping Israel and could be used to foster new trade and new stabilities. No? I think that's the general outlook. A loss of power in general, and loss of the economic and social model.
I see. Dr. Mathew, how will COVID-19 affect the economies of countries in the Middle East region and thus the redistribution of power there? How will the geostrategic environment look like in the region after COVID-19?
On the geopolitical environment, I'm not sure that it changes a lot. Biden administration has talked about getting back in the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran, but given how difficult it is for the US and Iran to deal with one another, Iran has certain conditions, US dropping its sanctions, etc. US wants, Iran to dial back some of the advances it's made on nuclear technology. I don't see that necessarily as a sure thing, and so I think there will be, still that really increasing tensions between Iran and on the one side, US as well. And Biden wants to reevaluate ties with Saudi Arabia, but I don't, the US needs partners in the Gulf, and I don't see that Saudi Arabia is not going to be, continue to be a partner for the US.
Who's going to be the partner? Who's going to be the partner?
I think it will be Saudi Arabia for the US, UAE, Israel, obviously. It makes it easier now with the agreements. I think US-Turkish ties are going to be continue to be very difficult. And obviously, Russia's increased role is going to be an irritant for the Biden presidency. So I think you're left with the same sort of geometry that U.S. and Gulf allies stand together. I don't necessarily see, even though Biden was part of the Obama administration, which developed the JCPOA, I don't see a new era necessarily of better U.S.-Iranian ties.
You don't think so? Although many is saying that with Biden administration that things will be back on the Obama's era between Iran and the United States.
Well, that's his stated interest in trying to get the JCPOA agreement back, operating again. But if you look at the history of U.S.-Iranian trying to get some sort of cooperation going, it is extremely difficult. The U.S. is going to, he talks about we need to bolster this agreement with Iran, no longer supporting Hezbollah. I mean, a lot of these things it's going to be, at least I see as impossible for Iran to meet those conditions. Now, I think the one thing that on the economic side is that increasingly, even before the pandemic, the Gulf was very reliant on China, East Asia, and other places. I mean, that their customers are much more in East Asia these days. So I think, and you've seen the growth of ties there. I think that will be given an additional boost just because China coming out of this crisis and that whole region, it's just not China, but East Asia, going back to being the economic engine. And I think those ties between the Gulf and East Asia that are pre-existing already will benefit from that. I think going back to a point that Dr. Ortega said, the Gulf could use this crisis really to, given the fact that there is increasing concern about fossil fuels, could use it as a way really to get into other areas for economics, for growth. And I think that would be the smart move, I think, at this point. And certainly it has increasingly we've seen the caliber of entrepreneurs in the region. I mean this gives them, I think, an opportunity really to expand into other areas than fossil fuel energy. So it can be despite the fact I don't see peace breaking out, across the Gulf, I think it can be an area of renewal nevertheless.
Thank you. Dr. Zaid, the same question of Middle East, I said this goes to be from the Middle East.
And being from Jordan too, so I feel the heat of the situation. No, well, look, Dr. In terms of economic impact, it is with no doubt that the COVID has lifted its very, very heavy burden and impact on all economies in the Middle East, without exception, of course, to varying degrees. So we're talking about the rate of unemployment now and in the future. We're talking about bankruptcies of so many companies. We're talking about the poverty, inequality, relative deprivation, social stress, and the rest of that. And, all of these are a very good recipe for destabilizing polities and also for radicalization. So all in all, these possible consequences of the COVID, if there is no enlightened leaderships in the countries, will really take us into a very, very dangerous future. And I think a lot of experts are seeing that line, or underlining that a trend one way or another. Now, in terms of geostrategic shifts and impacts, one more time, I can't say the following, except for Israel, because of its the structure of its economy. The rest of the country has been hit to varying degrees. Now, among other countries, when it comes to distribution of power and the rearrangements of the Middle East, we have to bear in mind the following facts. First and foremost, now I'm talking all of that in a very static way, not in a dynamic way, and I'm not actually bringing the Biden's factor into the analysis. I'm just seeing the things the way they are, and some possible trends in the future if we add some other variables, and I'll try to be very brief and quick. So unlike what also people think, I think Iran is a growing threat, but a declining power. And now we have to balance what that means exactly, because even Iran, when it is declining power, is still a growing threat. because, what a state will do then if they're declining and declining. So it's about the set of options leaders will opt to deal with this declining status. Turkey is obviously in a crossroad. Now, the core Arab countries, we keep in our eyes on Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. It all depends on how this will unfold. How long would it take to rebuild Syria? And it seems it's taken too long. Would Iraq really hold the center back again? And for how long? And who will be benefiting from Iraq? Then you're talking about some other countries, let's say Jordan. Now, Jordan, for example, is fighting its way for self-reliance and to invest more and more in its domestic fronts, politically and culturally, and in this food security issues and supply chain, and also in the public health security. Obviously, the Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are, because of their also the structure of their economy and the type of leaderships, I think they're going different directions. Given the new agreements between the Emiratis and the Israelis, I think we can see now where the region is heading, given the declining, crossroading, and uncertainty about most of the other countries. Then I can see how the new arrangements will look like.
Excellent. I'll pick some question from our viewers, and here Dr. Nabil Fahmi. He's saying that, okay, these are articulate, rational, and intelligent panelists. My simple question is, will the pandemic push the world to cooperate more, or because of the knowledge that its threats have no border and cannot be isolated in a network global community? Will this push us closer to balance of interest paradigm rather than the existing balance of power concept, or will this simply be a passing phase before we all repeat our mistake? I'm addressing this to all of you. Dr. Ortega.
No, what I think is that at the beginning of COVID, there was everybody was running for itself, no? Mm-hmm. And I think because of the previous situation and the competition between powers, the international framework, the multilateral frameworks were not working. The UN was not working. The UN Security Council has not worked. The UN has disappeared as such, except for the WHO and other agencies. But as a body, it has disappeared. The G20, I think, has not worked and has not done the necessary coordination. Is not a body of decision, but of coordination and to push things for everybody to do and other institutions to push for it. Has not worked also because I think that there was no shared interest among the members of the G20 as compared to what happened in 2008 and 2009, no? And maybe there was the need of a push by the US and Britain and France, which is what happened then, and maybe Saudi Arabia has been insufficient with that, no? Mm-hmm. So I think there is a trend to cooperate in some things, and we also see a competition between vaccines. We're going to see, as it was saying before, that there will be a competition between vaccines and a competition to get vaccines not to Europe and the US, but to the third world, no? Especially Africa, Latin America, and East Asia. So the competition will go on, but I think it's a new kind of competition. I don't think we can compare the world as it is, in which we are all one with the situation that was in Europe in the 19th century. Although it's attracting to have historical references, but I think we are in a new situation, and we're going to have to deal with that with new instruments and new kinds of policies. Mainly because we are not even in a bipolar world. We are in a bipolar competition between the US and China, but I think third countries are having a weight in all this and in the stability of the region of the world. And some third countries are very important, as we see in the MENA region with Turkey, with India, with Brazil, and some others. No, I think the rise of these third countries is becoming very important.
Dr. Mathew, please.
If Biden can change the course at the current course of U.S.-China ties and get it away from just competition and hostility towards one another, and incorporate a lot more cooperation, particularly on certain areas where there's mutual interest. Pandemics would be one. I mean, we did see, even between the US and Soviet Union during the last part of the Cold War, areas in which there were some cooperation, arms control being the primary one, and some acceptance of, red lines, each other's red lines. I mean, if you can get to a point where there is some cooperation, then I think you can build on it a much broader global multilateralist edifice, perhaps, more acceptance by everybody of the WHO and the WHO, and boost WHO powers. And I think climate change would be one area, because you have US, Europe, and China all saying that they want to eliminate emissions, get to net zero by 2050 or 2060. So in that arena, you could have more cooperation than competition. And that would be, I think, the optimal. I don't think we'll ever get back to a real multilateralist. I think we have departed from that, for some time. But I do think that in certain areas, maybe you could, and this would be dependent on the US and China seeing that, it's all well and good to compete, but there should be areas in which there should be cooperation.
China is always looking for, it thinks multilateralism is suit more than while the United States is looking for bipolar system. And this is how the Chinese, they are viewing that competition. Dr. Zaid, please, Dr. Mathew, if you have a comment on that.
Well, I would just say that I think if you look at Chinese behavior in some of the institutions, they are still very defensive, and they're still, worried about protecting their own sovereignty. So I don't think they're at all at a place where they embrace multilateralism, but I do think they, and maybe a Biden presidency, would be more willing to think about areas in which they could cooperate.
Cool. Dr. Zaid, the last word today is
right. Okay. So I actually would like to address His Excellency's Nabil Fahmy question, and I thank him for an excellent question that you've raised, but also by commenting on the last things. See, states uses different platforms as long as they serve their interests. I think after Japan and Germany benefited from Marshall plans and the new rules of the New World Order established after 1945, China was the most winner of the existing regime, of the existing world order, because it pays no cost for it. So it actually works for its interests. We will always defend multilateralism because it's always benefiting China out of that, and burden of security and other things provided by others. But back to what His Excellency raised, whether this will be a short-lived experience, this era of pandemic, and things will go back to its normal. Well, I tend to think so. I see the world was rifting apart while before the pandemic started. The pandemic only accelerated that. If you did in populism, nationalism, identity politics, fear, you name it, accusation, blame, all of that. I think things will go back again. Not only I hope they're going to be balance of interest and a greater good. This is what I hope for, but I think it will be a vicious balance of power politics.
We are coming to the last, but I will raise this is especially this question to you from Hanif al-Nakli. He's saying that unrelated to COVID-19, China has the top global 4 banks by assets. China has 3 out of the top Fortune 500 companies by revenue. China's patent applications led the world and are over double that of the United States. Even the Pfizer vaccine that is often described as a US vaccine is actually developed by Germany's biotech and China's fusion. So which of these trends are temporary?
To me, all of them.
My dear panelists, that was a great panel, and thanks a lot for you. We're honored and having you with us, and hope hosting you in Abu Dhabi next year, inshallah, 2021. Hope we are not obliged to take the vaccine, but if you are going to hold it, you should come with us taking your vaccine. But we will be, of course, having a pleasure with us next year. And I think this panel, we call it in Arabic, misk al-khitam, ya Zaid. Okay? This is the best. And thank you very much for your contribution to ADSD. Dr. Ortega, Dr. Mathew, Dr. Zaid. And this is the end of our ADSD. And dear viewers, I will conclude by reading our conclusion for these 3 days. We have been fighting with the time and with many ideas. Thank you, my dear panelists, and you can leave now. I will continue with our conclusion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a great session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zaid. Thank you. السيدات والسادة، على مدى 3 أيام وفي 8 جلسات شارك فيها 21 متحدثاً ومتحدثة ينتمون لنخبة الخبراء الاستراتيجيين والباحثين المميزين وصانع السياسات من أنحاء مختلفة من العالم. ناقش ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي السابع 3 متغيرات سيكون لها الدور المهم في تحديد معالم النظامين العالمي والإقليمي في الحقبة المقبلة هي انتخابات الرئاسة الأمريكية ومعاهدة السلام الإماراتية الإسرائيلية وجائحة كوفيد-19. وكما جرت العادة وفي ختام كل ملتقى سأوجز في هذه الكلمة أهم القضايا والأفكار التي طرحت في الملتقى. سعى الملتقى في اليوم الأول إلى البحث في تأثيرات وصول إدارة أمريكية جديدة في السياسات الأمريكية على المستويين العالمي والإقليمي. فليس من دون دلالة أن الانتخابات الأمريكية الأخيرة شهدت متابعة وترقباً من عواصم العالم على نحو يفوق كل الانتخابات الأمريكية منذ نهاية الحرب الباردة. فعلى صعيد انعكاسات وصول بايدن إلى البيت الأبيض على النظام الدولي، أجمع المتحدثون أن أولوية إدارة بايدن ستتركز على الأجندة الداخلية لمواجهة تداعيات جائحة كورونا وإنعاش الاقتصاد، فضلاً عن معالجة حالة الانقسام في المجتمع الأمريكي وتجديد القوة الأمريكية. كما أكد المتدخلون أن إدارة العلاقة مع الصين ستمثل التحدي الأكبر لإدارة بايدن على صعيد السياسة الخارجية، ورجحوا أن تستمر إدارة بايدن في سياسة التنافس مع الصين، لكن بشكل أقل حدة من سياسة إدارة ترامب. وفيما يخص سياسة الإدارة الجديدة تجاه روسيا، رجح المتحدثون أن يزداد التوتر مع موسكو، ومع ذلك لا يعني هذا الوصول إلى حالة القطيعة بين البلدين. وبشكل عام هناك توافق واسع على أن إدارة بايدن ستتبنى نهجاً مختلفاً عن إدارة ترامب على صعيد السياسة الخارجية، إذ ستعود الإدارة الديمقراطية إلى النهج المتعدد الأطراف وإلى الالتزامات العالمية والتعاون مع الحلفاء، لكنها مع ذلك ستبقى ضمن السياق التقليدي للسياسة الأمريكية الخارجية ما قبل ترامب. ومن المهم هنا تذكر أن بايدن سيكون رئيساً لولاية واحدة على الأغلب، لذا لن تحمل رئاسته تغييراً جذرياً أو بنيوياً في السياسة الأمريكية العالمية. أما على صعيد انعكاسات انتخاب بايدن على منطقة الشرق الأوسط، فقد كان هناك شبه اتفاق بين المشاركين على أن الشرق الأوسط لن يكون في صدارة أولويات الإدارة الجديدة. ولفت المشاركون إلى أن توجهات بايدن تجاه المنطقة ستنطوي على الاستمرارية والتغيير في الوقت نفسه، إذ ستختلف سياسات إدارة بايدن عن سياسات الإدارة السابقة فيما يخص إيران، حيث من المتوقع أن تنتقل الإدارة الجديدة من سياسة الضغط الأقصى إلى التحاور مع إيران ومحاولة إعادة الاعتبار للاتفاق النووي، وإن كان لا يوجد اتفاق بين المشاركين على الكيفية التي ستتعامل بها إدارة بايدن مع قضية الاتفاق النووي. بمعنى، هل ستعيد الالتزام به كما هو أم ستعيد التفاوض عليه مع طهران أم ستذهب إلى اتفاق جديد؟ كما ستتشدد الإدارة الأمريكية تجاه تركيا، في حين أن الدفء مع المملكة العربية السعودية سيكون أقل من إدارة ترامب. لكن سياسات بايدن ستتطابق مع سياسات سلفه في عدم الرغبة في القيام بمغامرات كبرى في المنطقة، ومن ناحية أخرى ستظل قضية الحرب على الإرهاب مهمة لإدارة بايدن، وسترغب في أن يكون الوجود العسكري الأمريكي في العراق وسوريا وأفغانستان مصباً على هذه القضية. وأشار المتحدثون إلى أنه أمام إدارة بايدن فرصتين في المنطقة، أولهما إمكانية العمل على خفض التصعيد والصراعات في المنطقة، والثانية تعزيز الشراكة مع الحلفاء في الخليج. في اليوم الثاني سعى الملتقى إلى استشراف معالم الشرق الأوسط في إثر توقيع معاهدة السلام الإماراتية الإسرائيلية واتفاق إقامة العلاقات الدبلوماسية بين البحرين وإسرائيل. لقد انطلقت اتفاقيات إبراهيم من مقاربة جديدة تجاه أزمات المنطقة المستحكمة، وهي مقاربة براغماتية ترتكز على الحاجة إلى تشكيل مستقبل جديد للمنطقة وتجاوز حالة الوضع الراهن التي لم تكن تقدم آفاقاً أفضل لأي طرف، مثل ما عبر عن ذلك معالي الدكتور أنور قرقاش وزير الدولة للشؤون الخارجية الإمارات. وكما أشار المتحدثون في الجلسات، فإن اتفاقيات السلام الجديدة تقوم على 3 دعائم، هي وقف الضم الإسرائيلي لأراضي الضفة الغربية، تعزيز الاستقرار والسلام وقيم العيش المشترك في المنطقة، وتحقيق المنافع الاقتصادية والتكنولوجية والصحية والزراعية وتحسين الحياة اليومية لشعوب المنطقة. ولفت المشاركون النظر إلى أن تغير الوضع الجيوسياسي في المنطقة يعزز فرص السلام الدافئ، كما توقعوا انضمام مزيد من الدول العربية لقطار السلام. وفيما يخص الدور الأمريكي، أكد المتحدثون أن دور الولايات المتحدة أساسي في حقبة السلام الجديدة في المنطقة، وأن الإدارة الأمريكية الجديدة بقيادة بايدن ستستمر في نهج إدارة ترامب في دعم اتفاقيات السلام وتوسيع تطويع العلاقات بين إسرائيل والدول العربية، مع عكس بعض سياسات ترامب تجاه الفلسطينيين. ويظل التحدي بنظر المتحدثين في دعم فرص عودة المفاوضات بين الإسرائيليين والفلسطينيين من أجل الوصول إلى حل الدولتين، وبذل مزيد من الجهود للبناء على الزخم الذي أنشأته اتفاقيات إبراهيم. مع أن دولة الإمارات شددت على أن خطوتها بإقامة السلام مع إسرائيل هو قرار سيادي وليس موجها ضد أي طرف في المنطقة، فقد أكد المتحدثون أن موقف إيران وتركيا المعارض للخطوة الإماراتية وللخطوتين البحرينية والسودانية أيضا ينبع من أن اتفاقيات إبراهيم تقدم نموذجا جديدا في المنطقة يقوض المنطلقات الأيديولوجية لإيران وتركيا ويتعارض مع طموحاتهما الجيوسياسية. وفي اليوم الثالث والأخير من الملتقى تم بحث التداعيات الصحية والاقتصادية والجيوسياسية لجائحة كورونا. فعلى الصعيد الصحي أشارت المتحدثتان إلى أن الأنظمة الصحية في كل العالم لم تكن مستعدة للتعامل مع هذا الوباء العالمي الذي خلق واقعاً جديداً وغير مسبوق، والذي سيمتد تأثيره في حياة الناس بشكل شامل طوال عامي 2020 و2021 على الأقل. وأكدت المتحدثتان أن كوفيد-19 كشف عن الثغرات في أنظمتنا للرعاية الصحية، إلا أنه في الوقت نفسه كانت له جوانب إيجابية تتمثل بتوظيف الابتكار والتكنولوجيا في القطاع الصحي. ويكمن التحدي أمام الدول في رفع مستوى الجاهزية وبناء القدرات للتعامل مع هذه الأوبئة العالمية من خلال تخصيص المزيد من الموارد والاستثمارات في البنية التحتية الصحية باعتبارها مسألة أمن قومي للدول، وتعزيز جمع البيانات وتحليلها لدعم السياسات، وتعزيز المرونة الصحية من خلال التركيز على الرعاية الأساسية والفئات الأكثر هشاشة صحية، فضلاً عن الحاجة إلى تضافر الجهود الجماعية المشتركة لتطوير أفضل الممارسات والتعاون لمكافحة وباء ذي طبيعة عالمية أصلا. أما على الصعيد الاقتصادي فقد تمت الإشارة إلى أن الدول استجابت للتبعات الاقتصادية لأزمة كورونا من خلال التوسع المالي الكبير، ما يعني أن الأنظمة المالية للدول ستواجه عجزاً وضغطاً مستقبلياً هائلاً. كما تمت الإشارة إلى أن مشكلة غياب اليقين حتى بالرغم مما نشر مؤخراً عن قرب اكتشاف لقاح جديد، ما يعني أن التبعات الاقتصادية لأزمة كورونا ستستمر حتى إلى ما بعد عام 2021. ومن ناحية ثانية كشف الوباء عن العيوب في الاقتصاد العالمي، لذا توقع المتحدثون أن يحدث تغيير في نظام التجارة العالمي، حيث ستعزز اتجاهات التصنيع المحلي وتعديل سلاسل التوريد. ومع ذلك أوضح المتحدثون أن مثل هذه الاتجاهات الجديدة ستستغرق وقتا، مشددين في الوقت نفسه على أن الأزمة أثبتت أن الدول لا تستطيع مواجهة الأزمات العالمية منفردة، وأنها قد تتجه إلى التعاون الإقليمي في الحد الأدنى، وتواجه دول تحدي الاستثمار في النظام الصحي والتعامل مع مشكلة توفير اللقاح على المستوى العالمي، والتخطيط للتعافي الاقتصادي ومعالجة حالة عدم المساواة داخل الدول نفسها، وتقليل الانقسام الرقمي بين الدول، والتفكير في سياسات تنويع الاقتصاد بالنظر إلى قطاعات معينة مثل السياحة التي كانت أكثر تأثراً بالأزمة من غيرها. وفي موضوع التداعيات الجيوسياسية لجائحة كورونا تطرق المتحدثون إلى أن التوجهات الجيوستراتيجية التي حكمت العالم قبل الجائحة ساهمت الجائحة في تسريعها، فالتنافس الجيوستراتيجي بين القوى الكبرى تواصل خلال الجائحة، مثل ما شهدنا في المنافسة بين الولايات المتحدة والصين. كما استمرت الصين في مسعاها إلى الصعود عالميا بالرغم من أنها تأثرت بالجائحة أيضا. وتمت الإشارة إلى توجهات الإدارة الأمريكية الجديدة نحو تبني النهج المتعدد الأطراف وإعادة الولايات المتحدة إلى الالتزامات والاتفاقات العالمية، إلا أنه ليس واضحاً بعد نطاق وأبعاد استراتيجية التنافس التي ستتبعها إدارة بايدن مع الصين، وأثير السجال حول تأثير الجائحة في ميزان القوى العالمية. وبينما ذهب متحدثون إلى أن كفة الميزان بعد الجائحة ستميل نحو الصين، رأى آخرون أن الولايات المتحدة ستتعزز قوتها العالمية، وبخاصة أنها ما زالت القوة التكنولوجية الأولى في العالم، وهي القوة التي أثبتت الجائحة أهميتها في التنافس العالمي. وأشار المتحدثون إلى أن التحولات الجيوسياسية والتغيرات في النظام الدولي ستبقى مفتوحة في ظل حالة غياب اليقين التي ستظل سائدة طوال عامي 2021. السيدات والسادة، هذا استعراض سريع لبعض ما أثير في جلسات ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي السابع من قضايا وأفكار تتصل بالمتغيرات التي ستؤثر في النظامين الدولي والإقليمي في الفترة المقبلة. ولا شك في أن الجلسات الثمانية للملتقى عززت الفهم للتحولات من حولنا، لكنها في الوقت نفسه أثارت العديد من التساؤلات والقضايا التي تحتاج إلى المزيد من البحث والتمحيص، والتي نأمل أن نقاربها في الملتقى المقبل. في الختام أود أن أتوجه بالشكر إلى جميع المتحدثين والمتحدثات الذين شاركونا أفكارهم وآراءهم وتوقعاتهم. وأشكر أيضا كل الذين حضروا جلسات الملتقى افتراضيا سواء عبر تطبيق زوم أو في منصات المركز المختلفة على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي. وأود أن أعتذر إلى أولئك الذين لم يتح لنا الاستفادة من أسئلتهم بسبب ضيق الوقت. كما أتوجه بالشكر الجزيل لمعالي الدكتور أنور قرقاش وزير الدولة للشؤون الخارجية بدولة الإمارات، والذي شرفنا بإلقاء الكلمة الرئيسة في الملتقى. ولا أنسى أن أشكر أيضا أسرتي الصغيرة، أسرة مركز الإمارات للسياسات بكل أفرادها الذين ساهموا في إنجاح هذا العمل. شكرا لمشاركتكم وتفاعلكم مرة أخرى، وإلى لقاء آخر في ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي الثامن في العام المقبل، وآمل في حينها أن تنحسر جائحة كورونا لنتمكن من استضافتكم شخصيا على أرض دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة وفي عاصمتها الزاهية أبو ظبي. وحتى ذلك الحين أتمنى لكم ولأحبتكم السلامة وطيب العيش. رفقتكم السلام. شكرا لكم. في كل عام يجمع ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي نخبة من خبراء تحليل السياسات من مختلف أنحاء العالم لقراءة المشهدين الدولي والإقليمي بعمق، وللتنبؤ بمسارات التحولات والقضايا المهمة في العالم. وفي هذا العام وبرغم التباعد الذي فرضته جائحة كورونا، إلا أن مركز الإمارات للسياسات حرص على تنظيم ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي في نسخته السابعة في موعده عبر عقد جلسات افتراضية تحت عنوان تفكيك الواقع المعقد، النظام العالمي الجديد، حيث سيناقش الملتقى عالم ما بعد الانتخابات الرئاسية الأمريكية من حيث تأثير نتائج هذه الانتخابات في النظام الدولي وفي عودة التنافس الدولي على الشرق الأوسط. ويطرح الملتقى هذا العام أيضا تفكيك شفرة الشرق الأوسط بعد معاهدة السلام الإماراتية الإسرائيلية، وكيف ستعيد دول الخليج العربية حساباتها الجيوسياسية بعد هذه المعاهدة، كما تحتل جائحة كورونا وتداعياتها جزءاً مهماً من نقاشات ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي السابق، خصوصاً استشراف طبيعة الاقتصاد العالمي ما بعد كورونا وتأثير الجائحة في التحولات الجيوسياسية الدولية وفي الأنظمة الصحية في العالم. ملتقى أبو ظبي الاستراتيجي يأتي هذا العام يحاول الإجابة عن تساؤلاتكم ومقاربة شواغلكم في هذه الفترة الحرجة التي يعيشها العالم. فأهلا وسهلا بكم.